Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the muddy fields and roaring horns of medieval battle where warfare wasn't chivalric pageantry but a brutal science of blood and steel. Forget the shining banners and heroic ballads you hear about in epic songs. The real battles, they were a clash of iron, mud-slick ground, and desperate screams that decided the fate of kingdoms. So tonight we're asking what actually happened in a medieval battle and more, where every charge could splinter a shield, every arrow could find a visor gap, and every broken formation could turn you into roadkill. Every army had its own nightmare, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always chilling to see whose battlefield we ride into tonight. Now dim the torches, brace yourself, and let's charge into the heart of combat together. You wake before dawn in a great hall hung with faded tapestries and groaning under the weight of centuries. The hearth's embers still glow red, but the torches have not yet been lit. Outside the narrow windows, you hear the stirrings of horses and the clink of armor as retainers ready themselves. You are the lord of this domain, and today you must sound the horn that will call every vassal and tenant to your banner. You pace a heavy wooden dais where your steward kneels beside a stack of wax-sealed writs. Each writ names a knight or freeholder, bound to provide service in exchange for lands and protection. You dip your quill into ink and sign your name with a flourish, knowing that each seal will carry your command across miles of road and woodland. The writs must then ride out by dawn's light, for the hour of gathering approaches faster than any rider can canter. Outside the hall door you find your herald, his tabard emblazoned with your crest. He lifts his trumpet and breathes deep. A single blast of the horn rolls out through the courtyard. It echoes off battlements and carries into the mist beyond the moat. You feel the vibration in your chest, and know that every man who holds land from you will hear that call. That single note binds him by oath to ride to your side, even if he must leave behind fields unharvested and roofs unthatched. Within the hour, mounted messengers race across farmland and forest trails to distant keeps. In each castle a knight links his gauntleted fingers and drafts his own writ to his squires and tenants. A cascade of orders flows down the chain of command until it reaches the smallest serf who digs in the earth at dawn's first light. They set aside tool and plowshare and brace for a march that may last weeks. Women lament at cottage doors, for their husbands will ride away and their barns risk the wolf's return. You know that some vassals will answer eagerly, and others will delay. Old grudges stir when summons arrive late or with damaged seals. A squire who served your father may claim his lord's writ is forged. A distant cousin may imagine your banners better suit his own ambitions. You steel your temper and grant a day's grace for couriers delayed by rain or war on the roads. Yet you also dispatch riders to knock on doors and to remind every tenant that failure to appear brings forfeiture of fief and favour alike. By mid-morning you begin to see banners stirring on the horizon. A blue pennon trimmed in gold flutters from a hilltop tower. A group of mounted archers chants a prayer as they cross a bridge. Heavy cavalry lances catch the sun's first angle and gleam like spears of fire. Ragged footmen follow behind, clutching rusty poleaxes and wooden shields. Some carry their meager belongings in sacks tied to their belts. Others bring axes, scythes and farm tools pressed into service as weapons. Their faces are grim with dread and excitement in equal measure. The chaos of the levy arrives next. Untrained peasants pitch in from every village within your domain. They come saddled with scythes, repurposed from harvests, old swords handed down from generations, and spiked maces carved by local blacksmiths. They know nothing of tactics or banners of command. They only know that you have summoned them by writ and by horn. You watch them huddle in ragged groups near the river crossing, nursing wounds from the last harvest and nursing fears of the first battle. You send your steward among the crowds to count heads and to inspect arms. He calls out names from your muster roll while clerks scratch marks on parchment. Some men step forward when called. Others slip away into the woods to tend to fields they cannot abandon. A few stand firm but reveal pikes with bent heads or broken shafts. Their eyes widen when the steward tells them they must arm themselves properly or face penalties that reach beyond tonight's skirmish. As the sun climbs, you climb onto a hill overlooking the gathered host. You hold aloft a standard painted with your sigil. Below you see the varied shapes of the army. Knights in polished helms sit astride draft horses. Men-at-arms in chainmail stand in tight ranks. Crossbowmen group by villages. Levies muster in loose throngs, their shields stamped with guild marks and family crests. You sense the weight of their gazes upon you. Each man wonders what command you will give, and whether he will live to see the next dawn. You draw a deep breath and raise the standard higher. The banners ripple in the midday breeze. The horn sounds again, louder than before, and every man in your host kneels in sudden reverence. In that instant, the chaos of peasants and knights, of farmers and merchants, holds its breath. You give the word to form ranks and to don pikes. Your herald calls the names of captains. Vassals seize their swords. The field before you falls silent but for the panting of horses and the distant cry of ravens. This is the moment when obligation becomes action. Words on parchment transform into steel and flesh. Each man bound by oath will march with you toward unknown dangers. Some will know fear's sting. Others will know only the terror of the masses they command. And yet each must hold the line when the first arrow flies or when the cavalry charge descends like thunder. For now you stand atop this hill with your army at your back and the promise of war ahead. In the next section you will see how this ragged host sets out upon the road, how supply trains groan under the weight of provisions, and how disease and desertion lurk in every muddy ditch. But here, at the moment of gathering, you hold the fragile promise of unity. You hold the power to forge this collection of oaths into a force that can break shields and bend kingdoms to your will. Keep that image in your mind as you prepare to march beyond this dawn's light. You stand among the columns of banners now fully raised over the assembled host. The morning sun glints off polished helmets and highlights the mud splattered on rough boots. In this moment, the true weight of feudal obligation settles on your shoulders. You recall the ancient oath you swore at your father's knee and the words you spoke before God and your peers. Those sacred vows bind you to answer your liege's call in return for the lands and titles he granted you. Yet you also know that the life of a vassal hinges on more than words. It depends on the muster of men and the iron discipline needed to turn homesteads into an army. Your first duty is knight service. As a mounted warrior, you owe 40 days each year at your liege's side, unless you pay scutage, a levy of coin that substitutes for your personal service. For many of your peers, scutage becomes easier than riding to every campaign. They send payments so that mercenaries and men-at-arms will take their place in the ranks. You choose instead to don your own hauberk and grasp your sword. You feel the old leather straps cut into your shoulders, but you know that personal presence inspires loyalty among lesser knights. Each of you stands ready to lead retinues of mounted squires who follow your shield and your word alone. Beyond mounted service, you must raise a contingent of infantry. Freeholders of modest means answer the call on horseback if they have one, but many must walk long roads to reach this field. They bring spear shafts trimmed with iron tips and leather jerkins padded with cloth. The levy extends to every free man who holds land within your domain. Their obligation can be commuted for a fee, yet few escape the muster without the coin or the face of a grim constable demanding compliance. You see old men arriving with scythes edged to a crude blade shape and with farm tools bound to their arms. They look to you for direction even though they know little of shield wall tactics or keeping formation under arrow fire. Then there are the serfs. They come last and in the greatest numbers. Bound to the soil by birth, they owe labor service, along with military duty in times of war. Their families stand at cottage doors, weeping at the sight of husbands and fathers trudging away with bundles of ragged kit over their shoulders. The serfs carry no hope of plunder. They carry only the fear that failure to appear will bring reprisals on the whole hamlet, yet many slip away at nightfall to avoid the summons. You dispatch armed retinues to round them up and drag them kicking back into service. Their reluctance breeds chaos along the edges of camp as constables struggle to keep order. Arming untrained levies presents its own challenge. Iron helmets and breastplates are scarce and costly. You allot each peasant an old wooden shield painted with your standard so they may not mistake friend for foe. Their weapons are crude yet serviceable. Farm hoes become billhooks. Flails once used to thresh grain now crack the air like a whip. Some carry short swords passed down from aging relatives. Others clutch clubs of oak gnawed smooth by use. You watch them test their makeshift weapons with nervous enthusiasm, imagining the moment when they will face steel points in earnest. The absence of training reveals itself quickly. In drilling field formations, you shout commands which vanish into the mass of dusty tunics. The peasants will not hold ranks in hand-to-hand combat. They will break at the first sign of cavalry charge or loose arrow flight. Discipline lies in harsh punishment. You order floggings for shirkers and place offenders in stocks overnight. The sight of punishment deters stragglers, but also sows resentment. Among your own knights, you must balance justice with mercy to keep morale intact. One broken man in the levy can inspire 100 to flee. Despite these challenges, you press on. Law and custom demand that the realm defend itself. Your liege expects a host, whether it is disciplined or ragged. Each man who stands beneath your banner represents your honor and your reputation. You assign veteran sergeants to lead pockets of infantry and to teach the basics of shield wall and advance. You drag peasants through shield drills and show them how to plant their feet under pressure. It is slow work, and tempers fray as spears poke bare legs and helmets slide over unaccustomed heads. The cheap leather gloves you provide chafe as steel tips bite wood and flesh alike. By evening you survey the gathered host once more. Knights in mail sit in neat ranks. Mounted squires tend horses and polish tack until it shines. Freemen stand in shield hedges rehearsed for a few passes. Peasants cluster at the rear, clutching tools they barely grasp. This motley host will march at dawn. In its ranks lie the fragile hopes of victory and the constant threat of collapse. A well-trained retinue can hold a flank, but a fleeing levy can turn victory into rout. You accept the risk. You are bound by oath and by land to gather the host in service of your liege. Now, you must trust that discipline and duty will triumph over fear and chaos on the field ahead. You wake before dawn with your cloak heavy from dew and your breath curling in the chill air. The camp stirs in shadows as torches gutter and horses pour damp earth. Your armor lies ready on its rack, but feels heavier than the last time you donned it. You swallow a stiff chunk of bread and listen to the scuff of boots on ground. This morning, you will strike out on the road to battle, where every mile tests your body more than enemy swords ever could. The first steps take you along a narrow trail, carved through fields of knee-deep grass. Your boots sink in mud that clings like lead and drips from the soles. The road widens where wagons have passed, wheels gouging ruts that fill with rainwater. Each footfall sends a clatter of armor across your shoulders, and you feel the weight of steel rubbing against your back. You lean on your spear at times, just to pause the ache in your legs. By mid-morning, the sun burns through low clouds, and your tunic grows damp with sweat. You catch the scent of wood smoke from distant villages as you march past thatch roofs and split-rail fences. Civilians pause in doorways, shading their eyes, to watch the lines of soldiers and the supply train crawling behind. Oxen strain at yokes carved from oak as cart drivers shout commands. The jingle of bridles and the creak of wagon axles follow you like a second heartbeat. The day presses on, and you hardly notice your body until hunger gnaws in your belly and thirst drums in your throat. You break for midday when the host halts near a shallow stream. Water glitters clear as glass, cold against cupped hands. You dip your helmet to fill it, then watch men edge forward and crowd the banks. Riders spill barley loaves and salted pork for the hungry. You chew quickly, ears pricked for orders, knowing that rest will last only until the trumpets call once more. A second march begins before the sun lowers. Shadows stretch across the road and the air cools. Your shoulders ache with every step, and your gait turns stiff. All around you, men shift from foot to ease the pain. You hear whispered prayers to saints of travel and protection. The host knows that night brings no true safety. Wolves lurk at forest edges, and highwaymen scout the columns for easy prey. You tighten your sword belt and scan each tree line as you march. Nightfall brings greater hardship as torches are lit at intervals to mark the route. You trudge past guards on watch who wave you forward by lantern light. The wheels of heavy wagons kick up dust that drifts through your armor and settles on your sleeves. You swallow another mouthful of bread dipped in water and keep moving. Sleep beckons, but you cannot spare the time. The host must cover ground before dawn or risk losing the speed that may surprise the enemy. Disease waits at every campfire and on every shared trench for washing. You see men clutching stomachs where fever burns and eyes milky with infection. Dysentery sweeps through the ranks with a silent ferocity more deadly than any sword swing. You watch a comrade slump against a wagon wheel and pray for mercy that never comes. Descending into coughing fits, he begs for water, but there is none to spare. You pass him by on the next march, hoping he finds relief in sleep you cannot pause to grant. Desertion plagues the host like a hidden blade. Some men vanish under cover of darkness, slipping into forest paths for home or hiding in farms until you pass. Others cast away their weapons and flee to join brigand bands selling their services to the highest bidder. You post guards at the rear and issue harsh threats for anyone caught abandoning the colors. Still, the numbers dwindle. Each empty helm and abandoned spear on the roadside reminds you that fear pulls mightier than loyalty. Weather becomes another enemy. Rain soaks your surcoat until it clings to your armor. You shiver as wind cuts through the columns and drives rain into your boots. You stumble on flooded ground where torrents carve fresh ditches. At river fords you wait hours for rafts and ferrymen to cross your host. Some horses drown in spite of tether ropes. You see pay wagons overturned and barrels of ale leaking into mud. Even stone bridges sway under the weight of passing carts. Discipline holds the host together. Veteran sergeants patrol the column, bayonet in hand, ready to quell any sign of unrest. They punish slackers by forcing them to carry extra gear or to kneel in water until the cold burns their knees. You issue strict curfews and limit fires to small embers. Each command, backed by lash and stocks, reminds every man that this is not a free hunt for plunder. Obedience here is the thin line between survival and becoming lost souls in the wilderness. By dawn of the third day, you crest a rolling hill and glimpse the smoke of the enemy camp on the horizon. Your body aches beyond measure, yet your heart quickens at the sight of plumes rising like the breath of a live beast. You smell wood smoke and cooking fires from both camps, and know that soon your march will end in clash of steel and cries of men. You survey the weary columns behind you and vow that each footfall brought you closer to this moment. As you approach the battlefield, you steel yourself for the next trial. You can no longer recall the number of miles behind you, or the cost in fallen comrade and deserted night. Yet every mile taught you that war begins long before swords cross. Disease and desertion whittle forces more surely than arrow or blade. A host must survive the road before it can face the field. Keep that in mind when trumpets sound the charge. The journey ahead will demand more than courage at dawn. It will demand endurance of every footstep taken to reach this blade-swept ground. You march on with the host, but your mind stays on the wagons creaking behind you. The supply train stretches as far as the eye can see. Barrels of water rattle in wooden racks. Sacks of grain shift with every bump in the road. You know that without these stores, your steel-clad host will starve long before swords clash. You glance back at leather hunters across palms swollen from the weight of oxen yokes. Drivers urge tired beasts forward with shouts and prods. Each drop of sweat on your brow reminds you how fragile this line of carts really is. As midday sun climbs, you ride beside a broken wheel lying in a ditch. Splinters of oak and iron bands lie scattered in the mud. A team of camp followers strains to roll the axle back into place. You dismount and lend a hand tightening a makeshift wooden wedge. Their faces are drawn in exhaustion. Today they will work from dawn until dusk to repair this single cart. Tomorrow, another will collapse under the burden of salted meat or iron-headed pikes. You know that every minute spent here is a minute lost before the enemy camp. Food rots faster than you can distribute it. The grain sacks swell with moisture when rain soaks them at night. You see silver beetles burrow into flour and see pockets of spoiled grain left to blacken in the sun. You order the quartermasters to shift the best stores to well-aired wagons and to cast away any sacks that smell sour. They comply reluctantly, because throwing away supplies feels as costly as sending men home in disgrace. You remind them that rotted grain kills as surely as sword wounds. Water is a constant worry. Streams along the road run shallow or stagnant. You watch men clamor for a drink and dip helmets into green-tinged water. A few guards try to boil it first in iron cauldrons fired with brush. Smoke curls into the sky as cow dung and wood crackle beneath pots. Many refuse the bitter taste of boiled water and return to the stream. You patrol the banks and warn that anyone catching fever from unclean water will be left behind. That threat buys grudging obedience, but can never stop every man. Disease spreads in the smallest of ways. A single rat runs across a wheel hub and tumbles into a barrel of oats. That oat feeds a horse whose saddle rubs sores into its back. The horse leans against a stable wall, and a stable boy refuses to wash his hands afterward. That single boy carries germs to a knight who bends low to adjust a strap. Soon the knight feels his stomach tighten and hears the call of nature in the brambles. He stumbles and collapses near the column's edge. You know that dysentery and fever thrive in close quarters. A cough in the night can become a death knell by dawn. Surgeons ride with the host, but they face impossible choices. They have only the simplest tools, a blade for cutting leather and a needle with coarse thread. They carry linen bandages stiff with vinegar and herbs crushed in a mortar. You see them kneeling beside men shivering in fever rags. They cup heat warmed wine to their lips and whisper prayers. Some men stir in delirium, others slip away into the final sleep. You order the surgeons to mark graves at the roadside so that you will later count how many you lost before ever seeing enemy banners. Hunger gnaws at discipline more cruelly than thirst. At dawn, your men wake to find only crumbs in the bottom of bread sacks. They lick the crumbs between their fingers and peer at the horizon for the next village. Foraging parties move out at a trot. Spears held aloft, they fan out into fields and woodlots. They gather roots and berries that stain their tunics black or green. They steal a pig from a farm or dig up a hidden cache of salted fish. When they return with enough to feed a few dozen men, they divide spoils into small shares. Hunger recedes only enough to keep panic at bay. Desertion grows as a hidden infection of its own. You walk the column at night and catch flickers of movement in the gloom. Ahead of the wagons, you glimpse a man slipping away along a footpath. His cloak hides the shape of a spear. He moves like a shadow released from chains. You send a patrol after him, but he has vanished into forest depths. You order torches lit at intervals to mark every path. You station guards at every crossroads with orders to shoot any man who tries to flee. Still, the numbers fall like mist at sunrise. Brutal punishments keep some men in line. You witness a deserter tied to a wheel and left to swing while his comrades march past. His face is pallid and his voice broken with regret. You ask the guard why this spectacle remains in use. He shrugs and says that the sight of a man punished will remind the rest of what awaits them if they abandon their oath. You wonder whether terror can truly bind a man to his duty, or whether it only teaches cruelty in return. Even the veteran knights feel the strain. You see them slow their horse to help ambushed baggage wagons that sink in the mud. You hear them exchange curses when their sword hilts rattle against cart frames. They recall days of training in castle yards and grand tournaments played out like dances. Now they chop wood for campfires and prune branches to clear forest trails. You respect their willingness to endure, but know that a knight exhausted by chores makes a poor cavalry charge. Orders still come marching in from your liege. He demands you arrive at the rendezvous by a certain day, or risk losing royal support. You tighten your jaw and send riders full gallop ahead to scout river crossings and to test ferrymen's prices. They hurdle over logs and scramble down embankments. They reach villages before you with pleas for fresh shoes and repaired harness. You might gain a day's lead by pushing your scouts hard, but you risk outrunning your own supply train. That choice keeps you awake at night. Finally, you crest a hill and see the enemy camp in a valley. Smoke rises in thin plumes and black tents dot the plain. The host you have labored to feed and keep alive trails behind you, ragged but ready. You know that many of your failures lie in that long train of carts and in the sickness that stalked each march. Yet here they stand at your back. Each man who remains alive carries the bitter proof that survival on the road is as crucial as victory on the field. You draw your sword from its scabbard and rest the tip in the earth. You turn to survey your host one last time. Their eyes look to you for a final word before they march down into the valley where war awaits. You lift the blade high. A hush falls across men who have heard your commands through weeks of hardship. Then you speak the word they have waited for. Their march will end, and their battle will begin. You step into an open field at dawn where the mist clings to the grass, and whispers of violence yet to come. Before you stand massive wooden frames on wheels and sledges, each bristling with ropes, gears, and stone projectiles. These are your siege engines and field artillery, the great machines of war that turn simple stones and iron into thunderous instruments of destruction. Today you will see how trebuchets, ballistae, and the earliest cannon reshape not just walls but the very tactics of medieval battle. At the center of camp you find the trebuchet. Its counterweight box hangs high atop a stout arm. The beam tilts with promise and menace as engineers adjust ropes and sharpen metal hooks. You touch the cold wood of the base and feel its carved grooves worn smooth by countless launches. When the crew hauls down the heavy counterweight, you sense the latent power waiting to hurl a stone as big as a man. In moments that stone will descend like a comet, smashing timber barricades or blasting a gap in enemy lines. The trebuchet's slow operation makes it a weapon of precision. You learn patience watching every strain and creak until release. Then you witness devastation in a single thunderclap. Nearby stands the ballista. From a distance it resembles a crossbow the size of a cart. Twin arms flex with tension like a coiled serpent ready to strike. You inspect the twisted skeins of animal sinew that store energy more powerful than any archer's arm. The crew fits a massive bolt and draws the winch handle until the bolt nuzzles the slider. Even the air seems to hum as the ballista waits. When the trigger snaps, the bolt launches with a hiss that turns to roar. It tears through shields and splinters helmets. You feel the ground tremble under its impact and know that a single well-aimed shot can turn the tide of an open field skirmish. You move on to the early cannon. Its iron barrel gleams with soot and hammer marks. A small crew shovels coals into the barrel until the heat glows red. Then they pour in gunpowder and tamp it down with wood. You stand well back as the touch hole glows and a slow fuse sparks to life. When the explosion comes, the shock rattles your teeth and the barrel recoils with a roar that echoes for miles. A round stone shot flies in a low arc, smashing wooden palisades and toppling unarmored infantry. The cannon's inaccuracy demands massed fire, so you see several placed side by side. They trial volleys until they find a lethal pattern. You realize that even in its crude form, gunpowder will undo the centuries of rigid nightly combat. Assemblement of these engines transforms the battlefield. You watch captains mark out zones where trebuchets lay siege at range, while ballistae cover flanks and cannon batter forward lines. Where once tight shield walls advanced in slow ranks, now armies fan out into irregular formations to avoid concentrated barrages. You see infantry deploy in depth, shielded by wagons and earthworks prepared overnight. Cavalry no longer charge in single mass, but in rotating squadrons that dodge shot and then fall upon weakened men. The presence of artillery forces every unit to adapt or be shattered. Logistics strain under the weight of these machines. You see oxen teams hauling wooden beams and iron plates from dozens of villages. Blacksmiths toil by firelight to forge hinges and reinforce wheels. Engineers carve stone in nearby quarries, destined for trebuchet payloads. Each stone must be precisely sized, or the engine's trajectory falters. You witness supply wagons groan under the load, and you know that your army moves no faster than these beasts of burden. Every march must be planned around roads strong enough to bear the axle weight. You review maps and mark out positions where rivers cross under bridges that might collapse. The road to battle now hinges on the capacity to move siege engines as much as to move men. Disease and fatigue stalk these machines as well. The sinew-powering ballista arms rots in damp weather. Cannon barrels crack under repeated blasts. You see crews halting work to patch ropes or to cool barrels in water. You sense the engineers' worry as they stockpile supplies of sinew, powder, and spare stone. A broken trebuchet arm can mean days of delay while carpenters refit oak timbers. You realize that in the age of artillery, speed counts as much as strength. A delayed engine is a wasted engine. When the day comes to deploy, you lead your host into a gentle valley ringed by low hills. You position trebuchets on slopes that give range and aim. You station ballistae among ridges so that they command approach routes. Infantry builds earthworks before cannon, using spades and stakes in frantic hours before the enemy sees your plan. At dusk, you light signal fires. You hear the distant reply and know that your foes have answered the challenge. Soon, the first stones will arc across the night sky like meteor showers. You feel the shift in your gut when you glimpse neither shield nor sword will decide this fight alone. The roar of trebuchets across the field becomes the new call to arms. The hiss of ballista bolts falling into shields replaces the crack of arrows. The thunder of early cannon redefines terror for every man at arms. You know that from this day forward, war will be measured in splintered wood and smashed armor, as much as in broken bodies. Before you lie the engines of war, silent now but humming with latent power. You draw a deep breath and grip your sword hilt. The men behind you adjust their helmets and tighten their gauntlets. The horses shift nervously, sensing the rumble of war machines. You raise your arm and give the word that will unleash these engines onto the field. Their thunder will carry farther than any trumpet and will announce the future of medieval battle. You stand on the crest of a gentle slope and watch the enemy lines unfold below. Once these fields saw only spears and swords arrayed in tight ranks. Today your trebuchets and ballistae demand a new kind of formation. Gone are the close shield walls that invited cavalry to crash through horses and riders in a single blast of momentum. Instead, infantry spreads into staggered bands, leaving gaps that allow projectiles to pass without shattering ranks. You sense the shift in every heartbeat, as open field tactics adapt to machines that throw death from afar. First, you notice the depth of deployment. Instead of one dense line of men, commanders now form 3 or more successive waves of infantry. The foremost ranks kneel behind small earthworks or sharpened stakes driven into the ground. Each man of arms holds his shield at waist level to intercept low arcs of stone and bolt. Behind these, veteran spearmen stand ready to press forward once enemy artillery stops. A third line of crossbowmen occupies trench works on higher ground. They provide covering fire against enemy foragers who might seek to disable your engines. This layered deployment ensures that no single salvo can break the host in one blow. Cavalry charges require fresh orders too. You recall the day when charging knights simply thundered forward under a banner into the teeth of spears. Now your heavy horse must wheel wide in sweeping curves to avoid fields where stones bounce like hail. Lancers hold their weapons pointed upward to deflect smaller projectiles. Horses trained on parade grounds now face mock barrages to harden them against the shock of shrapnel and ricochet. You see squadrons veer deep into flanks and ride back out, trading speed for safety in what commanders call the sweeping charge. Skirmishers emerge at dawn to probe enemy lines. Light horse armed with javelins ride at a trot along the horizon, lobbing missiles to draw enemy fire. They retreat behind concealed crews of arquebusiers and early gunners. These small teams fire volleys of grapeshot in quick succession. The scattering pellets whip through cloth and leather, driving defenders to seek cover behind wagon shields. When the smoke clears, your skirmishers advance again. In this dance of advance and retreat, artillery directs every move. Open operations now resemble a game of shadows cast by roaring engines. Communication transforms as well. Trumpets once summoned charges across fields of clear sight. Now buglers coordinate salvo timings. A single blast orders the trebuchet crews to heave down counterweights. 2 quick calls order ballista teams to load heavier bolts. Drummers sound the rhythm for signaling shield bearers to raise or lower their shields. Flags sewn with simple codes flutter on poles behind each unit. Commanders perched on captured hillocks rely on these signals to adjust formations on the fly. The roar of engines drowns out shouts across the field. Only rehearsed signals can cut through the noise. Supply lines become frontline concerns. Before field artillery, armies carried only food and arrows into battle. Now every trebuchet requires a train of oxen teams and carpenters. Crews keep spare beams and iron joints close by. When a wheel snaps or a pivot bends, repair parties rush forward under shield cover. You see veteran engineers solder burst ropes and replace shattered parts in record time. Each repair station is itself fortified behind wagon fortresses. A single undefended engine invites enemy raiders. The open field now includes workshops and storage dumps as high-value targets. Night maneuvers take on new meaning. You gather your officers around a dim lantern and outline a plan to reposition engines under cover of darkness. Guards patrolling the perimeter must wear muffled boots and carry lanterns with shutters to avoid detection. Crews slip along wooden tracks laid at the water's edge so that machines can cross marshy ground. When dawn breaks, your artillery will be 50 yards closer to the enemy camp. This creeping advance forces foes to vacate prepared defenses or risk a sudden barrage at point-blank range. You feel the excitement of pushing machines forward rather than waiting for siege to come to you. Scouting duty becomes an art in itself. Riders sent forward no longer count enemy spears. They measure the spacing of tents and look for artillery positions or raw earth depots. They note where marshy ground will slow a wheel or where narrow gullies will funnel projectiles to unintended targets. Every map carries shaded areas indicating safe ground for engine deployment. You review reports that outline approaches avoiding sharp stones that can puncture wooden axle boxes. The quality of the terrain around enemy lines now decides whether you can bring your most powerful trebuchets to bear. Morale shifts with every projectile arc. You see infantry tremble when a stone the size of a man slams into a shield wall. The thunderclap shakes the ground and rattles teeth even when no man is struck. Soldiers once proud to hold rank under banners now fret behind earthworks as they hear the gunners shout in triumph. But you also see fierce determination return to their eyes when orders arrive to move forward between volleys. The promise of covering fire from your own ballistae steels their nerves. In this way, artillery becomes both hammer and bolster of morale. Casualty evacuation demands new methods. Before battles ended in close quarters, wounded men dragged to tents behind the lines. Now cries echo across wide fields, and cart drivers must thread between trees of stakes and churned earth. You post medic teams beside shield wall breaks. They carry splints and vinegar salves to staunch bleeding until men can be moved. Some battlefields include mobile field hospitals set up near engine creaks. Surgeons hurry from case to case, their tools rattling in leather pouches. You remind yourself that survival now hinges on swift extraction from open ground and on immediate care before infection sets in. When the signal comes to advance, chaos erupts in a new way. Infantry staggers from behind cover, in staggered bounds, while artillery unleashes a final storm of stones and bolts. Cavalry darts through openings created by shattered shields. Engineers rush forward to adjust firing angles and reload. The field hums with the energy of coordinated destruction. You stand atop a hillock with your sword raised, not to lead a charge, but to direct the machines that make the greatest difference. This is not the war of banners, but the war of axle and lever. By late afternoon, the enemy lines break under pressure, not from a single spear, but from a succession of thunderous impacts. Shields groan under repeated hits until they splinter. Fields once safe for cavalry evaporate in craters gouged by missile impacts. Retreat becomes a rout as confusion overtakes the shaken host. You order your trumpets sounded, and watch as cavalry wings envelop the fleeing troops. The day's victory belongs to machines as much as to men. You descend from the hill with a sense of awe at how siege engines and field artillery now define open field tactics. No longer do armies face one another in symmetrical array. They face a calling card of thunder that dictates every movement. You know these machines will shape battlefields for generations to come. As you ride among the smoking remnants of the day's fight, you vow to master their use and to leave no field unconquered before the return of dawn. You find yourself among a line of bowmen assembled before dawn, the chill air rising in pale wisps around your breath. Each man stands with a longbow strung across his back and a quiver of arrows slung at his hip. Their faces are a mix of grim determination and nervous anticipation. You notice differences in kit. Some wear padded jack padding beneath leather jerkins, others in simple tunics with leather braces protecting their forearms. Yet all share the same hardened hands and taut backs that tell of years spent mastering the bow. This is the Archer Corps, the backbone of any medieval army that understands how to use steel and ash to dominate the battlefield. From boyhood, these men learn to draw a bow loaded with 40 pounds of tension. You recall how the local lord forced every freeholder's son to train on Sundays, shooting at targets in fields until their forearms bulged and their shoulders burned. A baker's apprentice might become the deadliest shot in the Shire. Archers practiced year-round rain or shine, their arrows whistling through woodland clearings and clattering into straw-stuffed butts. Over time, they developed a sixth sense for range and elevation, learning to judge distance by the flap of a banner or the rise of a hillock. Their training turned novices into masters of the arc and sent men into battle with uncanny precision. You move down the line and see layers of experience. Veteran sergeants lean on heavy English longbows carved of yew and ash, their arms thick from a lifetime of drawing full draw. Younger men grasp shorter bows suited for rapid fire and easier handling. Behind them stand crossbowmen, heavier and slower, but packing bolts designed to pierce plate mail at close range. Some mounted archers, trained to shoot while riding, hover on the flanks. This mix allows commanders to tailor volleys to specific threats. Longbows rain fire in sweeping arcs, while crossbows deliver pinpoint shots at choke points. Mounted archers harry flanks and cut down skirmishers before they breach the main line. When the order for the volley comes, you hear the command blow on a horn and feel the ground tremble under their boots. Archers raise bows in unison, arrow nocks clicking against the string in a single breath. Then they release like a tide of steel. Hundreds of arrows arc together and blot out the sky in a curtain of movement. The first volley screams overhead, falling upon enemy shields and helmets with a staccato roar. You see wood and sinew splinter on impact as targets shudder and bodies slump. Men unaccustomed to massed archery break ranks in the panic that follows. To sustain the arrow storm, archers train in rotating ranks. The front line kneels behind a hastily dug earthwork or a row of sharpened stakes. As they loose their shafts, they step back into rotation, replaced by the second line who have knocked and drawn while the first line fires. This leapfrogging ensures a near-continuous downpour. You watch sergeants pace alongside, encouraging fledgling archers whose arms tremble at full draw. The rhythm becomes a deadly dance. Reload, step forward, let fly, fall back, repeat. Each man becomes both musician and executioner in an orchestra of destruction. The psychological terror of an arrow storm rivals its physical devastation. You recall standing behind your own shield wall when the first flight came. The sudden hush as hundreds of twangs rang out stills a man's heart. Then the air filled with whistling death, an invisible mass descending to pierce steel, flesh, and wood alike. Horses shied and broke from their handlers. Foot soldiers, trained to trust shields in formation, found their defenses perforated in moments. The ground itself seemed to writhe beneath the arrow shafts. Even the stoutest knight felt dread coil in his gut at the thought that no armor could fully repel the coming rain. Archers wield more than bows, they wield fear. Before any mace or sword can taste blood, the arrow storm sows panic. You order the front ranks to stand firm and feel a thrill as the steel tempest crashes against your shields. You watch enemy infantry stagger under the hail, their cohesion unraveling like frayed rope. A break in their shield line invites cavalry to charge with sabers drawn. In this way, archers become the spearhead of any combined arms tactic. They do not merely soften foes, they rip holes in defenses wide enough for knights and infantry to pour through. Maintaining supply of arrows presents its own challenge. You see cartloads of fletched shafts rattling behind camp, bound in bundles of 20. Quartermasters oversee arrow forges, where fletchers replace broken shafts and retail feathers at flickering lanterns. Each arrow undergoes inspection for straightness and balance. A single warped shaft can veer wide and waste precious time. You remind yourself that an archer can loose a dozen arrows in a minute, so logistics must match this ferocity. A depleted quiver on the field means silence where there should be storm. Integration with other arms cements the archer corps' crucial role. You position them ahead of infantry and ahead of artillery emplacements to screen your own pieces from enemy skirmishers. When trebuchets hurl heavy stones, archers target enemy engine crews to disrupt repairs. When cavalry sweep toward the enemy flanks, archers shift aim to cover the cavalry's advance or to cut down pursuing horsemen. Their flexibility allows commanders to weave archery into every facet of the battle plan rather than treat it as a separate arm. As dawn breaks on the next field, you prepare your archers for another arrow storm. You inspect drawn bows and check that quivers are full. You remind every man that his focus must never waver. Consider distance, wind, and angle. They are the custodians of terror made visible, the ones who turn sky into a storm of steel. When the order comes, you know that their arrows will shape the battle more than any shout of rally or thundering charge. For in every medieval conflict, victory begins with the archer's volley. You brace yourself at the edge of the field, as the signal horn sounds twice in quick succession. That is the cue for the arrow storm to begin. Archers drop low behind breastworks of sharpened stakes. You hear the first twangs as bowstrings vibrate in unison. Hundreds of arrows leap into the sky as one living wave of ash and sinew. Each shaft arcs outward and then plummets toward the enemy lines as though summoned by fate itself. The initial volley is meant to shock and disorganize. You feel the ground tremble under the collective release as arrows tear through shields and helmets. The air fills with 1,000 whistles and thuds as flight turns into impact. Shields splinter at the rim and helmets dent inward. A man turns to you, clutching his shoulder where steel found flesh. His face goes pale, and he staggers back into the second line. Between volleys, the sergeants count the men in front. They call out numbers as each front rank falls back and is replaced by the second rank. This leapfrog method lets archers maintain a near constant rain of steel. They fire 2 volleys, then fall back. You see them knock arrows and draw again before stepping forward in step with the cadence of the drums. The pattern is relentless and gives no time for enemy to recover. To maximize terror, you order fire arrows loaded with pitch-soaked rags. At your command, flaming shafts streak across the field and land among enemy tents and supply wagons. You watch as torches alight hay and straw and then spread in tongues of flame. The enemy huddles in confusion, trying to beat out the fire. In that moment, regular arrows find gaps in shields and helmets as men rush to douse the blaze. The bowmen also practice targeted volleys against unit commanders. You see them train on standards and banners held high. A single shaft through a banner can expose the commanding officer's position. Once the standard falls, the lines lose heart. You remember a day when a noble knight fell from his horse under a hail of arrows, and his men wheeled away in panic. The loss of leadership turned order into chaos. Rotating mixed fire between longbows and crossbows compounds the effect. Longbows pluck out shields at medium range in rapid succession. Crossbows then deliver bolts with heavier penetration at closer range. You orchestrate their timing so that one volley cracks the line's outer defenses and the next punctures brittle mail. This pairing exploits both quantity and quality of steel flight. You enforce strict spacing between archers as well. Clusters of 10 men space themselves shoulder-width apart to avoid accidents and to widen the deadly curtain. Even in high winds, the spread remains tight enough to funnel arrows toward targeted zones. You watch each man adjust aim based on wind speed and angle of sun. They learn to compensate by tilting the bow or shifting their feet while keeping loose arrows at the ready. The psychological terror mounts as bodies fall and cries rise. You order trumpets to play a simple flourish just as the third volley begins. The sound cuts through the whistle of arrows and adds an ominous tone of drum and brass. Enemy soldiers drop to knees or collapse behind makeshift cover. They hold their shields above their heads in a vain attempt to block every shaft. When archers switch to point-blank fire, you smell wood smoke from the friction of string on bow in the cold air. Arrows fly so low they thud into the mud around your feet. You see them bounce off horse hooves and strike riders in exposed joints. At that point, the enemy can no longer form a coherent defense. Some flee, others drop their weapons and beg for mercy. Behind the archer line, you station mounted men to exploit disorder. As soon as the enemy front breaks, you send cavalry through gaps. They slash at panicked infantry or ride down those who try to rally. You watch the combination of arrow, storm, and cavalry charge unfold like a deadly waltz. Each element supports the other to magnify terror and maximize casualties. By dusk, you count the number of shafts spent and send supply wagons forward with fresh quivers. You know that archers can loose dozens of arrows per man in an hour. Resupply is a matter of life and death. Empty quivers leave the lines silent at their worst moment. You issue strict orders that no man loots arrows from the field until permitted. Every arrow must return to a bow. In the aftermath, you walk among the fallen. You see groups of arrows pinned in shields and in timber barricades. Their points gleam in the dying light. You understand that a rain of steel reshapes the battlefield like no other weapon. It severs cohesion, breaks morale, and sets the stage for every subsequent attack. As you return to your tent, you replay the image of empty shields and upturned faces, knowing that the archer's volley truly invented terror in medieval warfare. You wake before dawn to the thunder of hooves echoing against cobblestones and frozen earth. Your saddle creaks under you as you adjust the stirrup leather. Before you stands a column of mounted knights, each astride a massive destrier bred for war. Their armor glints in the pale light, while their lances rest against shoulders like frozen spears. You grip the leather reins and feel the horse shift beneath you, sensing your own tension. Together you await the command that will send you charging into the heart of battle with the force of a living avalanche. From boyhood you trained for this moment. You recall the days you spent at the tilt yard under the watchful eye of your lord. You learned to guide your steed with subtle shifts in weight and pressure on the reins. You practiced lowering your lance to meet a wooden quintain as you galloped full tilt. Each impact rattled your arm, but taught you to absorb shock through both bone and horse. You drilled again and again until the lance felt like a natural extension of your arm rather than a crude tool. Your warhorse wears thick barding of boiled leather and plate steel to protect its flanks and head. Each shiver of steel plates tells you that the blacksmith labored through long nights to fashion armor strong enough to deflect sword strokes, yet light enough to allow a gallop. You pat the destrier's neck and feel the muscled ridge of its shoulders. Beneath that heavy harness, you sense power held in check like a coiled spring. You did not choose a riding horse for its gentleness, but for its willingness to charge headlong into steel and fury. On your hip hangs a sword for close combat. You hope never to draw it. A well-placed lance strike often ends a fight before it begins, but you keep your blade ready in case your lance shatters or you are unhorsed. In that instant, a knight becomes vulnerable. You practiced mounting and dismounting in full armor until you could rise in a single motion. You drilled on fighting on foot in mail and helm as though every charge ends with hard steel clashing against steel on the ground. When the signal comes, you feel the stirrup leather shift as one of the sergeants raises his arm. The column surges forward in a deliberate walk that quickly becomes a trot. The rhythmic slap of hooves against earth feels like a drumbeat in your chest. Behind you, infantry stand in formation to watch or to clear the way. You see each mounted knight holds his lance tilted forward by hand or by leather thong. The field ahead lies open for 100 paces before it narrows between ridges. That space is where your cavalry will unleash thunder. You gather momentum as the column transitions into a canter. The lance weight shifts in your hand. Each heartbeat of the horse lifts and drops you closer to full charge. You feel the weight of your armor ease as speed carries you. Grass and dust mingle in your nostrils. You lock your arm and lean forward until your body rests nearly parallel to your horse's neck. Your destrier answers by lengthening its stride until the ground slides beneath you in a blur. At the gallop speed reaches its apex. The lance tip points straight ahead, and the mass of horse and rider becomes a moving wedge. You see the enemy shield wall below you preparing. You feel the surge of adrenaline as the gap between you shrinks. In that moment, all training, all pain, and all fear converge into a single pulse of power. You drive the horse forward with heel and voice. The gap closes, and you brace for impact as wood meets iron and steel. The crash is thunder incarnate. You absorb the jolt through arms, shoulders, and horseback. Your lance splinters as it meets shield edge or breastplate. The sheer force drives men off their feet. You guide your horse through the shock and pull the broken lance free. Behind you, fellow knights pour into the breach created by your charge. The sound of shouts, the scream of steel, and the pounding hooves blend into a tempest of war. You find a new lance or draw your sword. You circle back as your companions hold the line. The enemy shield wall trembles under repeated charges. You hear the crack of broken timber and the cry of wounded men. A knight thrown by the impact struggles to remount beneath a tangle of mail and torn straps. You urge your horse toward him to protect him from foot soldiers. In that instant, you know the true power of heavy cavalry lies not merely in single crash, but in the endless threat of return. As you regroup, you sense the peril every horse faces. A single misplaced arrow can pierce an exposed flank. A crossbow bolt can shatter bone under the barding. Horses trained for stadium charges can panic at the sight of scaffolding or at the crack of early cannon. You watch farriers scramble to tend wounded hooves and tighten barding straps rubbed raw by saddle girth. The same horse that bore you into battle may break beneath you by nightfall. The thunder of cavalry reshapes every tactic on the field. Once men stood locked in shield walls awaiting foot combat. Now those walls tremble under charge after charge until only the brave or the broken remain. Commanders who face your cavalry must adapt by digging ditches, driving stakes into the ground, or by deploying spearmen in hedges thick enough to hold a destrier. You learn that overwhelming force can be countered by prepared obstacles and by missile fire, aimed at horses, not riders. When the dust settles, you rein in your horse behind the front lines. You see banners dropped and helmets cracked. Your fellow knights count missing lances and tally horse lost as well as men lost. Each destrier returned to the lines after its charge is as victorious as the rider. You pat your horse's neck in thanks for its courage and vow to hold this thunderous edge as long as you can. The thunder of cavalry is more than a charge. It is a promise that no shield wall can hold forever. Each cresting wave of horse and rider carries the power to reshape fields of steel into paths of conquest. As you ride back to your line, you know that mastery of this thunder is the key to victory. Your heart pounds in time with the hooves, and your eyes glow with the memory of impact. When the next command sounds, you will lead another charge into the roar of war. You grip the shaft of your lance just behind the leather gripper and feel its full length settle against your breastplate. This is more than a spear. It is the culmination of years of training and the most dangerous weapon on the field when wielded from horseback. Drawn to your shoulder in the couched position, it becomes a missile of living force. Your horse's gallop adds momentum to your aim. When the moment comes to crash into enemy ranks, you and your destrier become a single engine of destruction. The lance you carry measures close to 4 meters of ash or oak. Its head is wrought iron, shaped into a razor-sharp point or a blunted tip for stability. A balance band of iron, known as a ferocia, sits mid-shaft to prevent it from toppling in a charge. You brace the butt end against your side and channel the power of horse and rider through your arm. When your steed reaches full charge speed of 6 to 7 meters per second, the impact force can reach tens of kilonewtons. This shatters shields and splinters helmets as if they were brittle wood. You learn to trust that force will do the work, but only if you hold your aim true. To master the lance, you spent seasons drilling with the quintain. Your horse galloped toward a swinging target, and you struck it at full tilt. Each miss rattled your arm, and each hit delivered a shock through saddle and stirrup. You learned to lean forward in sync with each hoofbeat, so that at the moment of contact your body and horse moved as one. You practiced bracing your legs as springs to absorb recoil. You practiced catching a broken lance, and then pivoting to strike again with your sword. When the real fight began, every second of that rehearsal mattered. When the order sounded, you spurred your destrier and sent your lance crashing into the enemy's front rank. You felt a snap as wood shattered against plate and a jolt that ran up your arm. Your helmet snapped back, and you saw the man before you yank his shield wheel aside. He stumbled, and you drove your sword home as your horse charged past. That killing blow began with the lance. If your aim had wavered by a single centimeter, your thrust would have glanced off arm harness instead of piercing the ribs beneath. But the lance brings peril to the horse as much as it brings death to the foe. Your destrier bears heavy barding of boiled leather and metal plates that can weigh over 30 kilograms. This armor deflects arrows and blades, but adds strain to every gallop. The shock of each impact drives force into the horse's spine and legs. Your horse heaves in exhaustion long before you feel fatigue. After a single charge, you sense your mount's pulse in your hand and feel its flanks heaving. A second or third charge risks injury. Fatigue and disease stalk the cavalry just as they stalk the infantry. Horses marched for days on end to reach the field. Every river crossing strains their feet against rocky beds. Every night spent in sodden fields leaves them shivering with chill. They sweat under armor in the heat of summer sun. They strain against reins as they wheel and charge. You watch the farrier at work. Hot nails driven through shoe leather and iron plates hammered into place. You know that even the best care can fail to stop laminitis or infection in a bruised hoof. As your regiment reorganizes for another charge, you pass saddled destriers, led by grooms who speak to each horse in low voices. They scrub away blood and mud from flanks. They loosen girths and check straps for signs of tear. They coax water from leather waterskins and offer handfuls of grain. They whisper prayers to equine saints in hopes that horses and riders will survive another thunderous impact. You sense their devotion and share their hope. A knight is only as strong as his mount and only as swift as the horse he rides. The thunder of cavalry depends on the lance's lethal power and on the horse's willingness to charge. You have seen both factors succeed in one moment of violence and fail in the next. When the lance meets flesh, you taste victory. When horse and rider crash to earth, you taste despair. Each side of this coin demands respect for both man and beast. For in the end, the greatest peril on the field is not the enemy's blade, but the fragile trust between rider and horse under the crack of the lance's blow. You stand shoulder to shoulder with your comrades on a wind-blown plain where the grass grows thin and the earth is churned by marching feet. Each of you holds a shield as large as a door. The shields overlap from one side of the line to the other until they form a continuous barrier of wood and iron. Words of command pass through the ranks, and you brace your shield against your thigh so that its top edge presses against the man beside you. In that moment, you become part of a single moving wall that will hold against every foe. Your shield is tied to your left arm by thick leather straps. The boards are reinforced with metal bands and a rim of iron. You grip the boss at the center to control its angle and to guide it into place at a moment's notice. Behind your shield, you tuck a round buckler to deflect blades that find a gap in the line. When you stand at full height, your helmeted head rises just above the top edge. You peer over the iron rim and see the pale sky and the enemy beyond. You trust your shield more than any prayer. Before battle, you drilled for hours so that every man learned to step in time. At the signal, you raised your shield in unison. The front rank held firm while the second rank pressed their shields into the gaps between boards above and below. A third rank brought forward spears and pikes so that spearheads formed a hedge beyond the shield wall. This layered arrangement meant that no enemy sword could reach your unprotected side, and no lance could crash directly into your body without running through a forest of spear points first. You hear the captain's call for the wall to move forward. With shields locked, you inch ahead like a slow tide of iron. The ground shudders under the weight of marching feet. Your spear rests in your right hand, and you hold it at waist height until the enemy draws near. Then you step back one pace and lift your spear to chest level. The shaft points forward at shoulder height, and the tip seems to float in the mist. You know that a single thrust can stop a charging horse or pierce the heart of a foot soldier. The spear line behind you adds depth to the formation. Veterans in the second rank hold pikes up to 4 meters long. As the enemy presses charges against your shields, you drive your spear forward and meet their weapon shafts. The pike heads catch between boards and halt an advancing foot. When horse charges come, you lean into the bridle of your destrier in the rear, and the pikes twist above the shield wall. A mass of glittering spear tips becomes an unbroken barrier that horses will not charge. In that way, the shield wall and spear line work as one seamless machine of defense. Discipline holds the formation together. You feel the man on your left press his shield into yours as you return the pressure. The force pushes you forward, but you keep your stance wide and your knees bent. Every man in the front rank learns to absorb the impact of shields pressed from behind. If one man falters, the wave of momentum can break the wall. You maintain your footing by shifting weight between soles and toes, and by digging your boots into the earth. In this way, you hold the line even under the heaviest charge. Training also taught you to rotate the front rank. After every 5 minutes of steady hold, your sergeant gives the sign and the first rank steps back. The second rank moves up, and the fresh shields take the strain. This rotation keeps fatigue at bay and ensures that every man remains alert. You feel your muscles tremble when the shield wall stands in place too long. Rotation brings you relief as you catch your breath behind the thin wall and prepare to return to the front. The shield wall also serves as a rallying point when lines break. You carry a simple carved pole decorated with cloth streamers. When panic rises, you plant this staff above the wall and sound a horn. The visible marker and its sound cut through the chaos. Men who lost formation hear the call and return to the safety of locked shields. Cavalry cannot exploit a gap when archers and infantry rally behind this living fortification. You know that training in rally and reform is as vital as the initial hold of formation. You remember a day in training when your captain rode a wooden horse frame against the wall at full charge. He crashed into the shields in 2 thunderous impacts, and then fell back unharmed. The shields held, and the spears above remained rigid. You drilled on that exercise until every man felt the tremor in his shield board, and then learned to brace so that the wave of force passed through the line without breaking it. Those drills taught you how unrelenting pressure becomes nothing more than a test of endurance in a disciplined wall. When battle dawns, you watch enemy spearmen approaching in wild ranks. Their lines waver as if drunk on courage. You wait until they are within spear range, and then order the front line to brace and the pikes to hold steady. The ground shakes under the charge of foot soldiers. You plant your shield and feel the thrust of dozens of weapons strike the board at once. Splinters fly and screams echo from both sides. Yet you hold firm and meet each blow with your shield boss. The enemy momentum collapses as spears at their chests drive them back into their own ranks. Beyond the physical defense, the shield, wall, and spear line exert psychological terror. You see enemy soldiers hesitate as they glimpse the unbroken expanse of shields stretching from one flank to the other. They know that no cavalry charge can break this living fortress, and no missile storm can destroy every board. You sense their fear from the way they slow their advance and shrink their formation. When they finally charge, they do so in smaller groups meant to probe for gaps. You drive your spear suddenly into the earth and catch them in a trap they could not imagine. Victory in disciplined infantry combat begins with training in shield wall tactics. You and your comrades learn to trust the man beside you and to move as part of a greater whole. You learn to read the shape of the wall and to sense pressure points where the enemy tries to break through. When battle erupts, you keep your eyes on the captain's signal flags above the shields. Every movement you make contributes to holding the line against all odds. For no matter how fierce the charge, or how heavy the blows, the shield wall and spear line together form an unyielding bulwark that only the most desperate foe can challenge. You brace your shield against the thigh of a comrade and step back to allow the spearmen behind you to move forward. Their shafts extend through the gaps above your board and form a forest of gleaming points that bristle toward the enemy. Each spear measures close to 4 meters in length and takes both hands to wield. When properly planted, they become an impassable barrier that halts cavalry charges and repels infantry assaults. Your sergeant has drilled you in creating the spear hedge before every battle. On his command, you drive your shield boss into the ground and step back a pace. The man behind you then thrusts his spear forward until its tip rests beyond the shield wall. Together, you form a layered defense where shield and spear work as one. From the front, it looks like armor and wood. From the enemy side, it appears as an endless row of steel points rising from the earth. You feel the weight of the shaft in your hands as you hold it steady at chest height. Behind you, the next rank does the same. Soon, there are 3 ranks of spearmen in support of your shield wall. The first rank plants spears into the ground. The second holds theirs at a slight upward angle. The third stands ready to move forward and replace fallen men. This depth ensures that even if the front or second rank falters, The hedge remains intact. Training also taught you to rotate the front rank. After every 5 minutes of steady hold, your sergeant gives the sign and the first rank steps back. The second rank moves up, and the fresh shields take the strain. This rotation keeps fatigue at bay and ensures that every man remains alert. You feel your muscles tremble when the shield wall stands in place too long. Rotation brings you relief as you catch your breath behind the thin wall and prepare to return to the front. The shield wall also serves as a rallying point when lines break. You carry a simple carved pole decorated with cloth streamers. When panic rises, you plant this staff above the wall and sound a horn. The visible marker and its sound cut through the chaos. Men who lost formation hear the call and return to the safety of locked shields. Cavalry cannot exploit a gap when archers and infantry rally behind this living fortification. You know that training in rally and reform is as vital as the initial hold of formation. You remember a day in training when your captain rode a wooden horse frame against the wall at full charge. He crashed into the shields in 2 thunderous impacts, and then fell back unharmed. The shields held, and the spears above remained rigid. You drilled on that exercise until every man felt the tremor in his shield board, and then learned to brace so that the wave of force passed through the line without breaking it. Those drills taught you how unrelenting pressure becomes nothing more than a test of endurance in a disciplined wall. When battle dawns, you watch enemy spearmen approaching in wild ranks. Their lines waver as if drunk on courage. You wait until they are within spear range, and then order the front line to brace and the pikes to hold steady. The ground shakes under the charge of foot soldiers. You plant your shield and feel the thrust of dozens of weapons strike the board at once. Splinters fly and screams echo from both sides. Yet you hold firm and meet each blow with your shield boss. The enemy momentum collapses as spears at their chests drive them back into their own ranks. Beyond the physical defense, the shield, wall, and spear line exert psychological terror. You see enemy soldiers hesitate as they glimpse the unbroken expanse of shields stretching from one flank to the other. They know that no cavalry charge can break this living fortress, and no missile storm can destroy every board. You sense their fear from the way they slow their advance and shrink their formation. When they finally charge, they do so in smaller groups meant to probe for gaps. You drive your spear suddenly into the earth and catch them in a trap they could not imagine. Victory in disciplined infantry combat begins with training in shield wall tactics. You and your comrades learn to trust the man beside you and to move as part of a greater whole. You learn to read the shape of the wall and to sense pressure points where the enemy tries to break through. When battle erupts, you keep your eyes on the captain's signal flags above the shields. Every movement you make contributes to holding the line against all odds. For no matter how fierce the charge, or how heavy the blows, the shield wall and spear line together form an unyielding bulwark that only the most desperate foe can challenge. You brace your shield against the thigh of a comrade and step back to allow the spearmen behind you to move forward. Their shafts extend through the gaps above your board and form a forest of gleaming points that bristle toward the enemy. Each spear measures close to 4 meters in length and takes both hands to wield. When properly planted, they become an impassable barrier that halts cavalry charges and repels infantry assaults. Your sergeant has drilled you in creating the spear hedge before every battle. On his command, you drive your shield boss into the ground and step back a pace. The man behind you then thrusts his spear forward until its tip rests beyond the shield wall. Together, you form a layered defense where shield and spear work as one. From the front, it looks like armor and wood. From the enemy side, it appears as an endless row of steel points rising from the earth. You feel the weight of the shaft in your hands as you hold it steady at chest height. Behind you, the next rank does the same. Soon there are 3 ranks of spearmen in support of your shield wall. The first rank plants spears into the ground. The second holds theirs at a slight upward angle. The third stands ready to move forward and replace fallen men. This depth ensures that even if the front or second rank falters, the hedge remains intact. The spear hedge remains a pillar of defense when every other weapon fails. When arrows run out or cavalry refuse to charge, it stays firm under the heaviest assault. It shows how disciplined infantry can hold the line against all odds because it transforms individual men into a single living wall of steel. As you lower your spear and rest the point at your feet, you feel a surge of pride in what you have built. In the next section, you will march behind this hedge into battle, certain that no force can break this unbreakable line. You surge forward with your comrades as the shattered spear hedge collapses under the weight of yielding foes. There is no time to breathe or to think. Your sword is raised in both hands, and you meet the roar of men shouting as steel meets steel. The air is thick with the clang of blades and the sickly scent of sweat and blood. Every step lands on trampled helmets and broken shields. You feel the heat of bodies pressed around you and the sting of metal slicing through fabric and flesh. This is the moment when the battle becomes personal and every man must fight or die. Your sword is a heavy blade of tempered steel, its edge sharpened to a keen angle that glints in torchlight. You learn to wield it in the yard drills of your youth. You practice the basic cuts and thrusts until each motion became reflex. Now you thrust forward into a knot of enemy infantry, aiming for gaps in armor at throat and wrist. The first man in front of you blocks with a tattered shield, and you pivot your feet to slash at his thigh. The steel rips through leather jerkins and bites into tendon. He collapses backward with a cry, and you step over him into the next pair of foes. Axes rise beside you. A foot soldier swings a battle axe in a wide arc, and the steel crescent whistles through the air. You dodge by crouching low, feeling the blade skim past your helm in a shower of sparks. Then you catch the haft with your offhand and twist the axe away from another attacker who leans in with a dagger. With one fluid motion, you hurl the axe into the ground at his feet and bring your sword across his chest. He staggers and falls, his eyes wide at the sudden violence of steel meeting bone. You glimpse a knight in plate armor bearing down on you with a mace. You raise your shield and brace for the impact. The mace head crashes against iron and sends a shockwave up your arm. You grit your teeth as rivets tear free and your shield buckles. You spin out of his path and drive your sword into the gap at his hip joint. His plate shifts with a shriek of metal, and your blade slides in until the hilt. He lurches with the force of his own momentum, and you twist free to face the next threat. The ground beneath you is slick with blood and mud. Every step risks plunging into gaping wounds or breaking an ankle on half-buried leg bones. You hear the grunts of dying men and the clatter of weapons falling from lifeless hands. A wave of men carrying pikes sweeps into your flank, and you spin to meet them. You parry a pike thrust with your sword, then slash across the collar of the nearest man. The steel scrapes against bone and stops short of decapitation. He reels back, clutching a torn throat, giving you a chance to thrust your blade low between ribs. Above the din, you hear horns sounding the advance of fresh troops. Their banners dip and rise as a wall of steel and mail moves in. You brace yourself as a second wave of enemies surges into the breach you hold. You strike with precision, targeting elbows and knee joints to disable men quickly. Each snap of bone and cry of agony echoes in your ears. Your shoulders burn with exertion, but you cannot pause. You know that a single moment of hesitation means being overwhelmed. A group of archers pushes forward, their bows slung behind crossbows cradled in leather. They raise short bolts and fire point blank into your back. You feel the sting of 3 narrow wounds across your shoulder blades. You spin and level your sword at the nearest archer. You drive him back against the remains of a wooden barricade and watch as he collapses under a final thrust. Then you turn to face his companions and hack at the crossbow bolts lodged in their shields. You wrench a bolt free and use its metal head as an improvised dagger. You catch a glimpse of mounted cavalry regrouping at the field's edge. You know that you must break this melee before wheels of horses thunder back into the line. You grip the pommel of your sword and shout a rallying cry. Your voice carries above the clash of steel. Men nearby hear your cry and form a tight circle around you. You take a step forward and drive your sword into the throat of an enemy officer who wields a curved saber. As he falls, you kick away his body and point your blade at the next wave of attackers. Through the haze of sweat and blood, you see a comrade raise a banner. Its cloth is torn, but its colors still vivid. The sight of that banner draws the remaining infantry into a final charge. Together, you drive through the enemy ranks in an unstoppable tide. You feel the surge of momentum as shields clatter and weapons ring against shields. Men fall on both sides, but you and your comrade push onward until the enemy line breaks and flees. When the melee ends, you stand among a mountain of fallen bodies. Your sword is nicked and stained. Your gauntlets are cracked at the knuckles. Your lungs burn as you gasp for air. You see faces frozen in shock and relief among your own men. You take a moment to catch your breath and to wipe your blade on the tunic of a fallen foe. You know that you may need every ounce of strength left in your body for the next battle. In the aftermath of hand-to-hand carnage, you gather your shield and sword and look across the field. You find the blood trails leading to every stagnant pool of red beneath broken shields. You remember the cries, the snapping of bone, the heat of bodies pressed so close that breath mingles. You understand how close combat becomes not only a test of skill but of will. Each stroke of steel demands courage and resolve. Each block with shield hinges on trust in your training and in the man beside you. When the day draws to a close, you help gather the wounded and fallen. You hold the hands of comrades who will not stand again. You whisper prayers for the dying and try to staunch bleeding with torn cloth. You know that tomorrow brings more battle. You steel yourself for the next clash of steel and flesh. For this is war at its rawest form, and you have faced hand-to-hand carnage and survived to fight another day. You stand atop a hastily erected platform of wagon wheels lashed together, your view stretching across tents, banners, and ranks of soldiers arrayed on the field. The roar of battle echoes from the front lines, a chaotic symphony of hooves, shouting, and the clash of steel. In this moment, you are the eye of the storm, tasked with bending the maelstrom of melee to your will through nothing more than leather straps, painted cloth, and human voices carried on the wind. Today you will see how banners, horns, flags, and runners become the lifeblood of command and control amid the chaos. Before dawn, your heralds laid out the system. Each manor's banner took its place on slender poles, red for the vanguard, blue for the archers, white for the reserve, and black for the cavalry wings. Every banner bore a simple device: a lion, a stag, a griffin, a boar, symbols chosen for clarity at a distance. You drilled your captains on their meaning and on the timing of signals. A single wave of the red banner meant advance. 2 waves meant hold. 3 waves meant rally at that point. You tested these signals in quiet fields until even the farthest ranks recognized them without hesitation. As the sun rose, you watched captains raise their banners in unison. From your platform, you raised your own standard high on its pole and waved it once to begin the advance. Immediately, the red pennons fluttered down the line, each captain snapping his banner upward at the same instant. The ranks moved as though on springs. Spearmen pressed into spear hedges. Archers took up firing positions. Cavalry trotted to the flanks. You felt a surge of pride. The thousands of men under your command obeyed a single command word delivered through cloth and wood. But the moment the first arrows flew and the first lances crashed, the true test of cohesion began. Wind gusted across the field and sent banners flapping erratically. Dust rose in clouds from hooves and boots, obscuring vision. Enemy horns sounded their own melodies, and crossbow bolts zipped past poles studded with the colors of your captains. In the swirl of sound and sight, your signals risked drowning in a storm of noise. You learned quickly that clear commands required repetition and boldness. You ordered trumpeters to play your advance call in rhythm with the banner waves. The sharp blast pierced the din of battle and carried across the field in a pulse of sound. You watched as captains raised their trumpets in response, echoing the call to ensure every man heard it. The trumpets and banners combined gave each unit two senses of instruction, sight and sound. Even when dust blinded vision, the trumpet's cry guided soldiers toward the next move. Flags added nuance to your commands. A square flag of yellow and black meant wheel left. A triangular red pennon meant wheel right. A small white pennon waved vertically meant form square. Your captains learned to carry multiple flags on a single pole and to shift between them swiftly. You drilled them in flag semaphore above the din of war games until each gesture became instinctive. When the enemy cavalry threatened a flank, you waved the yellow-black flag and saw cavalry wings wheel without breaking stride. Discipline held the line. Yet flags could become a liability when poles broke or ropes snapped. You witnessed a captain's banner cloth tear in half under the strain of a sudden gust. The remaining fragment flapped like a wounded bird and caused confusion as the men hesitated over its meaning. You sent a runner forward to clarify the order, only to see him cut down by a stray arrow before he reached the front. Every signal had its risks. You learned that redundancy was the key, overlaying banners with trumpets and runners to ensure orders reached every man. Runners remained indispensable. You stationed them at intervals of 200 paces along key approaches. Each runner wore a simple surcoat in your livery, so that soldiers recognized him as a messenger rather than an opportunist seeking plunder. You trained them to memorize orders quickly and to repeat them verbatim. You favored brief, clear commands. Hold line here, form shield wall, charge left. Each runner carried a small board painted with the unit name and the order, so that even if speech faltered, the written word could guide the soldiers. During the thick of combat, you dispatched runners across flanks to relaunch reserves. You watched one sprint over shattered shields and fallen horses, arrows whistling overhead, to deliver your command to a lonely knight holding a pass against enemy infantry. He cut down his last assailant just as the runner appeared, passed him the board and order, and charge rang out again. That single message turned a desperate stand into a victorious rout. You felt the power of centralized command, even in the bloodiest confusion. But runners were mortal, and signals imperfect. On one occasion, you discovered that a runner had delivered an outdated order by mistake. The reserve infantry wheeled into the wrong gap and collided with your own cavalry wing. Steel rang on steel as friend and foe collided. You had to sound the hold trumpet over and over while waving the white pennon to stop the confusion. Casualties rose on both sides until you sent another runner to sort the mess. In that crisis, you felt how fragile cohesion could be under miscommunication. Smoke added its own layer of complication. Fires from burning palisades and flaming arrows blackened the sky and clung to banners like stains. You noticed your yellow-black flags darkening at their edges until they became indistinguishable at a distance. You turned to rely more on sound. Your trumpets and drums became primary instruments of control when sight failed. You learned to time drum beats to signal infantry changes in formation and tempo. Each beat code carried across ranks like sine waves of intention. Nightfall presented its own challenges. You lit watchfires to mark positions but hesitated to wave bright flags that might betray your lines to enemy archers. Instead, you issued orders by torch blasts and lantern signals. 2 blasts meant regroup, 3 meant retreat. You stationed riders with lanterns strapped to their saddles to circle the lines and flash signals between units. The interplay of light and shadow created a silent choreography of movement in the darkness. When dawn broke, you realized your lines had held together through the night without losing a single banner. Throughout the battle, you faced the constant ebb and flow of engagement. Units became intermixed. Lines fractured under heavy assault. Men became separated from their captains. You saw squads rally under a lone banner where their original standard had fallen. In each case, local initiative mattered almost as much as your signals. You instructed captains to empower sub-lieutenants and veteran sergeants to issue local commands when the bigger plan faltered. You learned that command and control thrived on a blend of central orders and decentralized initiative. Once the enemy began to rout, you sounded the final trumpet call for the charge. You waved the red standard twice, and then held it aloft to guide pursuit. Cavalry wings thundered through broken lines while infantry advanced behind the clamor of hooves. You watched banners ripple in the wind and trumpets echo across the field like triumphant roars. Then, as chaos turned to victory, you replaced the red standard with the white banner of assembly. You called runners to gather the weary and the wounded into lines behind captured enemy weapons. The same signals that had driven men into battle now guided them to reformation and relief. By sunset, the field lay quiet, but for the moans of the injured and the crackle of dying fires. You climbed your wagon platform and surveyed the scene. Flags drooped from broken poles. Trumpets lay dented and blood-stained. Yet the system you built had held through thunderous charges and swirling melee. The banners you raised at dawn still flew over your victorious host. In their flutter, you saw the strength of unity forged by cloth, horn, and human will. In the end, command and control on the medieval battlefield was a fragile art. It depended on simple signals made bold, on redundancy across senses, and on the initiative of every man trained to act when sight or sound failed. You learned that cohesion under fire rose not from rigid orders, but from flexible systems that tolerated smoke, wind, and the chaos of combat. As you lowered your standard for the night, you knew that tomorrow would demand the same dance of signal and response, for no victory is secure until every banner flies anew in the morning light. You stand in the heart of the field as the clash of steel and thunder of hooves reaches its crescendo. For hours, both armies pressed forward and recoiled in equal measure. Shields shattered, banners fell, and yet neither side had gained the upper hand. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. The momentum of battle shifted like sand under your feet, and you felt the tide of war roll out from beneath you. It began on your right flank, where your cavalry wing had ridden hard to counter an enemy wedge. Their charge splintered a spear hedge, but instead of pressing home the blow, your knights paused as the enemy spears reformed into a dense barrier. The hesitation cost you. From the rear guard of that enemy force emerged fresh cavalry, sent by their commander to exploit your momentary weakness. They struck your flank with the ferocity of berserkers, smashing through unprotected side shields and sending your horses rearing in panic. You heard the crack of lances snapping under iron helmets and saw your own men hurled from saddles. As panic spread among your cavalry, their retreat felt like a landslide. The shattered wing poured back into the center, trampling your foot soldiers and severing shield links. You turned to rally them, but the ground beneath burst with cries of "Enemy cavalry on our right." The shout echoed through your ranks like a death knell. Spears once planted in confident defiance were yanked free as men scrambled to meet the new threat. The front line buckled, and you felt your own shield press against the man beside you as he staggered backward. In that instant, morale faltered across the field. Archers ceased their volleys, uncertain which way to aim. Infantry locked in grim combat pulled back to face the fresh cavalry pressure, only to leave gaps that the enemy archers exploited with precision fire. Each arrow found a helmet hinge or a bare arm, and men fell screaming into the churned mud. The sight of comrades cut down at your side sent a ripple of fear through even the hardest veterans. You felt the breath catch in your throat. Your captains rushed forward, waving banners desperately. You caught sight of your red pennon flapping as your standard bearer tried to rally the men. You raised your own sword and shouted orders, but your voice cracked under the din and traveled only a few paces. Dust and blood clouded your vision. You realized then that flags and horns alone could not restore order when fear had seized every heart. You had to act yourself. You spurred your destrier forward into the breach and let out a roar that cut through the chaos. You crashed into the enemy cavalry's flank, your lance couched and your horse barreling through steel and sinew. The shock of impact shattered 2 enemy riders and sent a third stumbling into his own men. For a moment you held the line open, and small pockets of your cavalry poured back through the gap, reforming their lances in a ragged circle. You heard your trumpeter sound the rally call and saw the blue pennon rise again among the survivors. That flash of defiance sparked hope. Across the field you saw other captains charge into wavering ranks, their swords slashing at the enemy's flanks. Foot soldiers who had been pinned under shield walls seized the moment, driving their pikes into enemy bellies and forcing them to kneel in disarray. The smell of sweat and blood turned from fear to fury. You heard the chant of your banner's name rise above the tumult, as men found courage in one another's presence. Meanwhile, on the left flank, your archers had reloaded and found vantage on a low rise. They unleashed a fresh volley that fell not on your own lines but on enemy reserves massing for a second cavalry strike. The hail of arrows snapped spokes and severed reins, causing horses to panic and riders to be cast aside. You saw the enemy archers falter as they watched their own comrades driven back, and the combined shockwaves rippled through their ranks. With both flanks stabilized, you ordered a counterattack. Your infantry columns reformed behind shield walls, each man planting his shield boss firmly and gripping his spear to meet the enemy's momentum. Beneath the crashed cavalry and the shattered pikes, you felt the power of disciplined ranks once more. You raised your banner high and felt the weight of every man's gaze upon it. Then you waved it downward in a single sweep advance. The renewed assault struck the enemy center like a battering ram. Your cavalry, remounted and repaired as best they could, thundered back past shattered shields. Your infantry surged forward under a wall of spearheads and shield bosses. The ground trembled as 2 living walls collided in a final conflagration of flesh and steel. The enemy line buckled at the breach you created, and in that moment of weakness, their morale collapsed completely. You saw enemy standards drop as officers were cut down. You heard the battle cry of your men turn from defiance to triumph. Those who fought on slashed at shields without pause, forcing gaps that widened into chasms. Where once your own men had faltered, now they pressed the advantage. You realized that momentum in battle flows like water. When it turns, it sweeps everything before it. You rode among the victorious, urging them onward, forcing the enemy into flight. Pursuit became a frenzy of steel and hoof. You chased broken ranks down ridges and across streams, cutting them off from any chance of rally. You saw the dust of their retreat climb like a ghost from the dying earth. Some found refuge among trees and hedges, but your archers and cavalry followed, hurling volleys and javelins until no enemy soldier stood. You tasted victory in the stench of blood and the cries of those who surrendered. As the dust settled, you surveyed the field. What had begun as a stalemate ended in your crushing victory, the turning tide brought about by a single flank collapse and the swift counterstroke that restored cohesion. You reflected on how close you had come to defeat. Merely an instant of hesitation on your right could have brought a rout that swallowed your army whole. Instead, you held your nerve, seized initiative, and rode the surge of battle to success. In the aftermath, you tended to your wounded and exhorted your captains to maintain discipline. You sent plenty of runners to secure the field and gather stragglers. You knew that an army remains undefeated only so long as it retains order after victory. You sent your trumpets to sound assembly across the plain, and banners rose once more to mark the survivors of your host. The turning tide teaches that in medieval warfare, victory often hinges on a single moment when morale falters and lines break, or when a commander acts swiftly to restore cohesion. It shows that armies, no matter how large or well-equipped, remain fragile under the weight of fear. It shows that a single flash of courage can reverse despair, and that the momentum of battle flows through disciplined units as much as through the will of any one man. As you leave the field, you carry this lesson in your bones, that victory belongs to those who seize the turning tide before it sweeps them away. You hear the trumpets call the charge, and then the sound of horses' hooves rattling like thunder over broken shields. What was once a pitched battle now becomes a chase scene of brutal efficiency. Your cavalry spills over the edge of the battlefield and races down the slopes where fleeing soldiers plunge headlong into dust and despair. In that moment, mercy dies under the weight of adrenaline and the lust for victory. The first wave of pursuit is a living avalanche. Heavy knights in plate armor lean low over their steeds, lances couched and broken, swords drawn for slaughter. Behind them, lighter horsemen weave through the gaps, cutting down stragglers who try to wrestle pikes from hands stiff with fear. You feel the shock of each impact as riders crash into a fleeing footman. The sound of cracking bone and the brief scream of agony stabs through the din like a musical note turned to poison. You know that none who fall under the charge will be spared. Behind the murder of the chase comes the frenzy of looting. The air quivers with shouting and laughter as cavalry spur up to wagons abandoned in the route. You see men tear open leather flaps to seize sacks of coin, goblets, crates of wine. Helmets and breastplates glint in hand as trophies of the slaughter. A young squire shakes a pouch of silver into his boot, eyes alight with greed and triumph. The field transforms into a chaotic market where only the swift and ruthless claim the spoils. Infantry follow behind, scavenging broken weapons and shields. A hand-to-hand flail lies half buried in mud. A soldier pries it free and belts it across his back. A battered crossbow bolt rusts against a shield boss. Another man twists it out and wedges it into his belt as a souvenir. Everywhere you look, men cast aside their own fatigues to don the plundered gear of their foes. A common foot soldier now strides among the cavalry wearing a knight's helm, swaggering as if he too could ride down men in full harness. The dust hangs thick and makes each breath taste of dirt and iron. Horses snort and paw the earth, eager for more blood. Their riders test new blades, swing behind the saddle at any shape that moves. You see a pair of archers find a cache of bowstrings and arrows in a dismantled cart. They string their bows on the spot and set to work shooting at hiding soldiers who raise trembling hands to surrender. When your captains shout restraint, the archers mutter curses and stalk off to find softer targets among the wounded. In the middle of the madness, you see a mounted knight dismount by the side of the road. He kneels beside a wounded enemy soldier, his sword belt draped over a nearby trunk of looted silver. The knight checks the man's breathing, cups his face in a gauntleted hand, and offers water from a flask. It is a moment of stark contrast to the savagery around. You sense both mercy and helplessness in the act. The knight cannot save the battlefield, but he can save this single life. You wonder how the mercy of one man squares with the slaughter of thousands. Camp followers swarm into the abandoned enemy camp at the field's edge. Women and children slip past fallen pikes to claim bowls of porridge left in haste. Blacksmiths and wagon drivers race to salvage gear and animals. A stable boy rounds up captured mares and geldings, hoping to spare his own ruined mount from the same fate. The camp becomes a theater of plunder and survival. You see that the spoils of battle rarely reach the king's treasury intact. They are claimed in pieces by anyone bold enough to seize them in the frenzy. Wounded soldiers lie everywhere in the churned earth, their blood soaking into the dust. Those left behind by the pursuit face a grim fate. You pass a man with a shattered leg who crawls toward the rear lines begging for help. A comrade offers him a flask and a few coins, then helps him to a wagon bound for the field hospital. You glimpse a surgeon stooping over a collapsed helmet, trying to stem arterial bleeding with cloth torn from a tunic. Even in victory, the cost of battle remains written in every agonized grunt and every ragged breath. Beyond the immediate horrors, you sense the deeper toll of pursuit and plunder. The battlefield, that once tested discipline, now rewards chaos. Soldiers return to camp drunk on violence and coin, eager to spend their gains in taverns, or to gamble their lives away in cockfights. Others nurse their wounds in silence, haunted by the screams they could not silence. You see men tremble as they count the dead, tallying the cost of victory with a shock that grows each time they recall a face cut down under their own blade. Commanders must struggle to restore order as the sun sinks low. You sound the assembly call on your horn and wave your banner above the plundered wagons. Slowly the din subsides as captains rein in their men. You order all who carry enemy arms to gather in a single pile. You summon quartermasters to inventory prisoners, to claim ransom, and to collect spoils for the king's share. Discipline returns in fits and starts as soldiers grumble at having to return wares they considered theirs by right of conquest. You know that the battle may be won, but the war for your men's souls has just begun. At twilight, you survey the field one last time. The pursuit has scattered the enemy like leaves in a storm. The plunder glitters under the last rays of sun. Horses graze on the edges of the battlefield, picking at wilted grass and ignoring the smell of death. Your wounded lie quiet in their wagons, their moans fading to nothing as dusk closes over them. You see the flicker of campfires and hear the low murmur of voices planning the next day's march. In that moment, you feel the weight of command more acutely than in any clash of arms. You step away from the final clash and move among the wounded and dying scattered across the churned earth. The air hangs heavy with the scent of blood and wet earth. Broken shields lie abandoned beside swords slick with gore. Everywhere you look, men clutch torn limbs or press crude bandages against gunmetal-colored blood. The roar of battle has fallen silent, but the cries of pain and despair rise in a haunting lament. The first task is to sort the wounded. Commanders send out small teams of helpers carrying boards the color of old wood. They call out names of officers first, then freeholders, and finally conscripted peasants. This process is crude, yet urgent. Men whose limbs are shattered, or whose wounds are so grave that they cannot survive, are marked for prayer but left for later. Those who might yet walk under their own strength or with simple aid are collected under tarpaulin folded to cradle an ankle or shoulder. The concept of rapid assessment was known even here. Simple tasks achieved more than hours of delaying agony. Medieval surgeons arrive next. They ride on rumbling wagons drawn by oxen and accompanied by clerics bearing vials of holy water and reliquaries. The surgeons wear leather aprons stained dark by previous campaigns and carry iron tools bound to leather pouches. A straight saw with coarse teeth, a curved blade for lancing abscesses, blunt needles threaded with linen to suture wounds. The surgeon's apprentices carry buckets of hot water, heated over portable braziers. Steam curls into the cold air and carries with it the sharp tang of sanitizer made from raisins boiled with vinegar. Those with arrow wounds fear the shaft more than the surgeon's knife. Surgeons fan the barbs with steady hands and rasp them away from flesh. They press linen soaked in wine to the missing gap and bind it tight. The bitter taste of fermented grape burns the tissue in ways that slow infection. Others with deep slash wounds watch as embers are pressed into the cuts to seal arteries. They bite on wood fragments provided by the barber surgeons who cut hair from skulls and beards before lancing a skull fracture. Each step is logical and desperate, and often the only hope of staying alive. Carrying the wounded to the field hospital takes ingenuity. Litter bearers improvise using shields as platforms. They strap blankets over shields to cushion the broken men. The bearers stagger along narrow paths marked by spikes of wood driven by engineers to keep carts from entering. Wagons rattle over stones and dip into ruts. When a shaft breaks, the bearers unload legions of food and water and begin repairs. A fallen wheel means delays that cost seconds, and those seconds might mean the difference between life and death. At the edge of camp, a marquee stands as the main field hospital. Its canvas walls flutter in the wind. Inside, simple wooden tables bear the implements of life and death. Clerics move among the tables, reciting prayers. Surgeons kneel beside the wounded and whisper words of comfort. They sever limbs struck by mace or sword blow. A man who has lost a foot knows that he will never run again. The saw bites through bone, with a sound that echoes, and the man roars once, then falls silent as the blood flows free. A brother knight holds his hand and prays for courage, morale and class shape who gets attention first. Noble captives receive gentle care and warm broth boiled with spices brought from a supply wagon. They are offered parchment and quills to write letters to their families. Freeholders who paid scutage are given linen bandages and a pillow of straw. Conscripted foot soldiers are bound with torn cloth and sent to stand or sit in racks on the far side of the marquee. Some yelp with pain and others stare blankly at the canvas roof painted with daylight that never seems real anymore. As night falls, the injured face the shadow of infection. Flies cluster around fresh wounds. Their buzzing drowns out prayer. Surgeons apply poultices of herbs to deter maggots and to draw out toxins. They crush marigold petals and mix them with lard to smear over wounds that must remain open. They warn that only iron will slay the invisible demons of disease and hope that prayer and poultice can spare the rest. Each patient listens in fear, for they know that infection carries them to a final rest more surely than any blade. Neglect lurks in the corners of camp. A handful of walking wounded wander away under moonlight and collapse in the ditch. No one finds them until the dawn. Others, whose ranks bear the lowest station, find no hands to help them. They lie in the open, shivering under a sky of stars, until ravens come calling. You see a man whose face is cracked with fever. He pleads for a fresh shirt or warm broth but finds only silence. In this hour of triumph, some souls lie abandoned. Victory tastes of ash and blood when any man can be left behind to die alone. Still, the most heartrending task is mass burial. By early morning, the ground is too hard to dig. Yet no one can walk safely through the fields layered with dead and maimed. Military engineers arrive with pickaxes and shovels. They carve trenches along riverbanks or beneath ancient hedgerows. They lower bodies of friend and foe side by side. Some graves hold dozens, others hundreds. As each coffin of woven willow is filled, the men repay the fallen with a prayer and a handful of soil thrown over splintered armor. No hallowed ground will know these lives. They rest together in shallow earth by the road they fought upon. In the first hours after battle, the survivors gather what remains of their strength to tend the wounded and to gather the spoils. They load carts with useless weapons and transport the injured back toward friendly strongholds. Each cart carries a few souls too weak to walk and the precious stores that might save them. You watch the column file by under the rising sun. They move at a crawl. Their faces are drawn in grief. Their armor is dented and rusted. They each carry pain deep in their bone and sorrow heavier than any pack. The care for the wounded extends beyond the field. In nearby abbeys, monks prepare herb gardens and tinctures. They grind roots of mandrake and hyssop into powders. They bake buns with garlic and onion to ward off fevers. These remedies travel back to places where the survivors gather. Many who survive the first night cannot escape the lingering shadows of delirium. They see shapes moving in their dreams. They lose limbs to gangrene after weeks in cold, damp acreages. Some come home only to spend the rest of their days shackled to crutches. The fate of prisoners is fraught with uncertainty. Noble captives may be held for ransom and find a bed in a great house. Others may be sent home under parole with a promise to return for another campaign. Common soldiers may be thrown into dungeons or forced into labor. Some mercenaries find offer of pardon if they take up arms for the victors. Each fate echoes the cruelty or mercy of captors. For every few bodies buried, there is at least one life exchanged for gold or service. When the dust finally settles, you recall how even the best intentions falter under the weight of so much suffering. Spectacles of skill and courage fade in memory against the relentless tide of blood and infection. The task of battlefield medicine remains half artisan, half prayer. Surgeon and monk stand side by side, blade and prayer book in hand. They seek to bind wounds and to heal spirits damaged by war's brutal lessons. Yet no remedy can erase the truth that in the aftermath on the field, the living and the dying share the same ground and the same final rest. In the hush that follows the final clash, there is a moment when the earth seems to hold its breath before the long ripple of history begins. The field where men fought and died does not remain silent for long. In the decades and centuries that follow, the memory of blades and banners shapes the fortunes of kingdoms, the songs of bards, and the very identity of peoples. This is the legacy of the battlefield. The first echo of battle is political. When armies meet and one side claims victory, it redraws the lines of power. Kingdoms gain territory, lords exchange fiefs, and the balance of influence across the realm tilts like a scale. A king who triumphs on the field may demand new loyalties from rebellious vassals, or insist on heavier taxes to rebuild castle walls shattered in the fighting. Treaties signed beside the blood-spattered grass rewrite alliances. Generations know the names of the field and the date of the fight as the moment when a nation rose or fell. Territorial gains also bring long-term challenges. New borders must be defended against fresh threats. Lands once peaceful become marchlands, where fortress towers watch one another across brackish rivers. Lords appointed to govern these borderlands learn bitter lessons in law and in war. They discover that the men who fought at their side on the field expect reward in the form of spoils or of safe holdings close to home. When any promise made after battle is broken, loyalty frays and rebellion simmers. Thus, a single army victory can lead to decades of unrest if the crown fails to manage the spoils with care. Economics feels the strain as well. Fields where crops once fed villagers now bear the scars of siege engines and of cavalry charges. Carts damaged in the rout must be mended or replaced. Peasants who survived the carnage return to plant new seed in soil mixed with iron and bone. They work side by side with foreign prisoners pressed into labor. Markets hum with trade, in captured weapons, and in ransom payments paid by noble families. Silver flows from one chest to another, and local coinage shifts in value as merchants adjust prices to match the cost of rebuilding. In this way, the battlefield sets the rhythm of commerce long after the banners have been furled, yet the most enduring legacy lives in memory and myth. Bards and troubadours gather tales of heroes who fell facing impossible odds and of standard-bearers who rallied broken ranks. They add flair to every narrative. A knight who died beneath 1,000,000 arrows in fact faced only a few dozen. A common soldier who rose to slay a mighty foe becomes a giant in song. Villagers stake their pride on the ballads that claim their fields as the first stage of a great drama. Children learn these tales at their mothers' knees. Over time, the stories overshadow the facts. The battlefield becomes a stage upon which truth and fiction dance together. In some regions, festivals arise to mark the fight. Every year, the townsfolk don simple costumes and reenact the charge with wooden swords and shields. They gather at the field before dawn, raise straw effigies to burn at sunset, and recite the names of the lost in sober procession. The event feels part solemn tribute, part carnival. It binds the community in shared memory. Even those born centuries after the last arrow flew see in the festival the heart of their identity. They claim descent from the fighters who ran through mud and smoke to change the course of history. Walls of ruined watchtowers and collapsed gates still stand to remind travelers of the stakes once waged here. Tourists journey from distant lands to see rusted helmets and shattered blades preserved in local chapels. Curators display banners once carried into battle alongside arrowheads and broken stirrups. Visitors trace the cracks in breastplates and read of the courage and misery that mingled in equal measure. Schoolchildren point and ask questions about how it felt to charge a line of spears or to hear the roar of steel in their ears. The battlefield remains a classroom of tragedy and of glory. Scholars debate the true cost of these clashes. They pore over chronicles and letters to reconstruct troop movements and casualty counts. They visit archives for the treaties written in trembling script at dawn. They analyze the soil chemistry, where mass graves lie unmarked in pasture land. In their work, the myths slowly give way to nuance. They learn that victory often hides a price too dear. A king may wear a crown, but his realm bleeds under the weight of ransom payments and endless defense of newly won borders. Yet these scholars also find that in myth certain truths endure. The stories capture the courage, the horror, and the resilience of the human spirit in ways that bare numbers cannot. The battlefield's legacy shapes art and literature as well. Poets write of the dance of steel and the meeting of shields as though they were celestial jewels. Painters capture the swirl of color as banners snapped in wind and riders plunged into arcs of dust. Sculptors carve marble reliefs of charging knights and of weeping widows. The best works honor the memory of sacrifice, while warning against the folly of repeating the same mistakes. In galleries and in cathedrals, these pieces speak across time, reminding viewers that behind every legend stands a human heart that beat its last in service of a cause. Religious institutions appropriate the memory of battle to reinforce faith. Churches built on former campsites feature stained glass windows depicting scenes of martyrdom on the field. Chapels dedicated to saints whose intercessions saved soldiers from death become pilgrimage sites for warriors seeking divine favor in new campaigns. Monks collect the bones found in shallow mass graves and lay them to rest beneath stone altars. The mix of sacred and profane on these holy grounds highlights how faith and war have long been intertwined. Each prayer offered for the dead echoes with questions about the justice of violence and the cost of peace. For descendants of those who fought, the legacy can be personal. Family lineages trace back to a single banner passed from generation to generation. A great-great-great-grandson of a knight who held the field for a single hour keeps the battered helm in his study. He tells guests how his ancestors' courage saved the kingdom, though records show he survived only by the mercy of a captor's ransom. Yet the object gleams in the firelight as proof that blood and steel shaped his destiny. In this way, every household claims a piece of the battlefield in their lineage. Modern nations adopt the battlefield as a symbol of unity or of difference. The nation that triumphed on the field carves its victory into coins and public monuments. The defeated may set aside their memories under the cover of time, or may enshrine them in local museums as warnings of hubris. Some countries mark the anniversary of the battle with solemn ceremonies at dawn. Others pass laws to preserve the field as an archaeological site and place plaques to educate visitors about the events that unfolded there. The border between fact and memory blurs in these acts of commemoration. In the end, the battlefield endures because it embodies the extremes of human nature. It shows the capacity for bravery and for brutality. It reveals solidarity born of common purpose and cruelty unleashed in moments of terror. It binds the living to the dead, the present to the past, and the future to the lessons of final charges and shattered shields. No matter how far society moves from swords and steel, the echoes of those fights still haunt the grass and the stones. We carry their memory in every tribute, in every song, and in every silent prayer for peace. As you leave the field for the last time, you sense the weight of all those who rest here. Their stories swirl around you in the wind. Each footstep feels heavy with the ghosts of men who charged and who fell. The legacy of the battlefield remains a mirror to our best and worst selves. It stands as a testament that history is neither kind nor fair, but that memory, guided by wisdom, can transform tragedy into understanding. May we learn from the past, and may the fields that bore witness to bloodshed one day know only the quiet passage of seasons and the gentle growth of grass.